Good afternoon, I'm Sheena Butt. Today I'll be talking to you through my exploration of Deborah Eyre's principles of threat and challenge through her philosophy of high performance learning. This CPD will be a whistle-stop tour of the highlights of the high performance learning program, and it will explore some of the attributes that we can encourage some of our learners to take on board in order to achieve their full potential. The program has been around for over 30 years and it's a worldwide program with lots of different levels of participation. And it is all about creating that world-class school environment that will help our students to understand their learning, their thinking, in order to achieve a lifelong set of skills that will allow them to be successful both in education and in their life. The CPD is broken down into 3 sections. I will start by examining how the HPL program embeds a structure into schools and encourages the generation of high performance in students. The middle section will look at how we can develop these attitudes and attributes within our students for them to become high performance learners. And then finally, I will look at some strategies and support mechanisms that we can put in place to help our students manage their cognitive load as they progress through education and life in order to prepare them to be successful in learning and in their life situations. In a moment, I will play you a short introductory video into the HPL program. Before that, let me tell you a little bit about the founder and the chair of High Performance Learning. She's a leader of a global network of schools that use the learning of science to help every child become a high performer. She has been involved in this for the last 8 years, and in particular developing and implementing a bespoke framework that enables schools to achieve world-class outcomes for students and educators. She is a leader, influencer, researcher and writer with Oxford Brookes University, and she has published several books and articles on how to grow great minds and foster a culture of excellence and innovation in schools. She's established cross-sector partnerships with governments, universities and organisations around the world, and she has a mission to transform education through evidence-based practice and empower schools to become world-class educational settings.
High-performance learning is for good schools who want to ensure that more effective.
The foundation of high performance learning is embedded within the structure which generates the performance of the pupils. And this has two core strands. One is linked to how they think through advanced cognitive performance characteristics, and the other is linked to how they behave. Now, the main foundation lies behind teachers using strategies to facilitate students to become responsible learners, innovative learners, and students who are empowered within their learning to take on board activities, challenges that will bring them into new experiences. And ultimately, it's all about removing the barriers to help them to achieve. And as a school, it's about supporting that network of all learners, not just the ones that we have maybe categorized as gifted and talented, or those who we might have put under the SEND characteristic of being vulnerable. And as all schools have a diverse body of students, it is our duty to ensure that we enable all students to have access to the array of facilities to allow them to achieve the maximum potential that they have within their capabilities. Foundations of the High Performance Learning Programme stems around building better brains and systematically looking at how we create advanced learners with the pupils in our schools. And if we consider some of the significant figures in society who are leading the government, leading large blue chip companies, and working in high stressful roles, most of these will have come from mainstream backgrounds, although we do know a handful of these come from privileged backgrounds. But not all privileged backgrounds start off with foundations that have allowed students to become advanced performers or the global leaders that they are, and enterprising in their manners. And what we've got to consider is how we can build these better brains, because we are always reflecting in the belief that there is room for more at the top, and that the traditional approaches to how we often group our learners is not always functional. And rather than labels being used, we must be open in how we approach our students in helping them to excel and develop more well-rounded, happy students who have these high-performing attitude and values at the root of everything that they do. Schools are not just measured by their exam results. It's about achieving the academic excellence alongside a much wider set of values. And that is what sits at the heart of all schools' ethos. It's about the collaboration and the risk-taking to agile thinking and concern for society, as well as perseverance that we try to install in all our students. And as we can see, the framework for the HPL programme is about engaging all parts of school fabric in terms of the people that work in the education aspect, the administration roles, the extracurriculum supporters, whether internal or external. And it's a philosophy that's fostered by the whole professional community, that everybody has the potential to attain at a high level and be intellectual and academically minded in their success. The following 3 slides look at the characteristics of what you would see in a high performance learning school and what makes it stand out from the others. And I think in today's educational settings and climate in particular, there has been a massive move towards making students more responsible and allowing them to be exposed to a huge amount of culture capital to broaden their understandings, their experiences, and to make them more prepared for their life after school. And what you will find in these slides is that there is a huge undercurrent that runs through the high performance learning school that makes it stand out. That key language and key focuses that maybe in the past have been a highlight of many teaching and learning strategies are no longer utilized. And it's all about learning habits and learning attitudes and the cognitive load that students are now under from the pressures and demands of educational exams. So here you can see we assume that everyone of all ability in a HPL school is capable of achieving that top level mark. And it's not about abilities, it's about their performance now and in the future. And it's all about how we can build attitudes and attributes, the enterprising nature of their thinking, and this huge problem-solving mindset. And these are strategies that are shared across all branches of the school teaching and supporting community. Now, when looking at these features about the curriculum, intelligent student groups, minimal differentiation, and the optimistic outlook, and reading the attributes of these features that we would see in a HPL school, one could be forgiven for thinking, well, that relates to a grammar school or it relates to an independent school. But more and more, we are seeing all schools, not just the selected schools, but all schools, are taking on board the fact that they need to plan curriculums that are broad in nature, deep in content, and that they're providing students the opportunities to develop higher order skills in many areas. And no longer are we using assessments to predict future outcomes, because it's inevitable that things change in a young person's life. And we have seen over the years countless reports and studies of child prodigies who have peaked for whatever reason at quite a young age, who maybe years as young children have been under quite huge amounts of stress in terms of preparing for particular grades or assessments to achieve, and often under duress, not out of their own choice. But once they're of age and choice becomes quite flexible, quite a interesting concept, studies have shown that these students or these young individuals achievement levels, despite their inner ability, can sometimes waver. So these characteristics are essentially about allowing the broad range of students to work together and enable everyone to become a master in the variety of knowledge that they are working towards. These relate to the fact that the peripheral activities that surround a young person's education are equally important in establishing the characteristics of being a high performance learner. And as we come to exam seasons or post-exam seasons, it's about looking at the bigger picture and looking beyond the traditional ratio or charts that we produce that signify the average outcomes or the expected outcomes. And during the era of CAGs and tags, where some schools were highly inflating results against those schools who were very rigorous in their robust systems for monitoring, moderating the samples of work across all subjects, the development of an individual is not based on a grade. And as teachers, we do try to signify that to them throughout their schooling, although many will argue against that, because for many, those exam grades are what takes them to the next level within their career choices. And it is unfortunate that students and young people in general are categorized by their grades for the assessments that they do at the various stages of their school life. So it's important we do consider the wider picture of the involvement of the parents and the carers in developing those cognitive attributes and the values and attitudes that we instill in them during the school day, that they're also duplicated in other areas. And constantly we are getting students to be more engaged, more proactive and positive in their outlook. With society as it is, with the influence of social media, sometimes we feel that we may be fighting a losing battle. But school for many is a safe haven and a place where they excel. And so it is this duty that we have to ensure that students are not labelled by their outcomes, but more by the attitudes and attributes of how they approach the completion of the various activities that they engage in. So as Deborah Eyre mentioned in her video, the HPL program is based on the 7 pillars of high performance. And these are all holistic themes and interrelated. And as she mentioned, it's not about rejecting a school's current way of working, but rather looking at how HPL provides a vehicle to strengthen and enhance what is already in place. And it provides a long-term strategic direction for teaching and learning in schools, for schools to reflect on their own context and culture, whilst making the most of contemporary thinking in learning and teaching. The HPL is an innovative style of cognitive-based education that operates in the whole school system. It is there to involve every single child so that they can achieve academic success and live a life full of opportunity and fulfillment, regardless of where they've started. And as I said earlier, looking at some of the high significant figures in society, it's important that we do realise that many of these have come from backgrounds that are no different to you and I. And these principles here that we have in front of us are all about making an individual a person that on the worldwide stage can hold their own comfortably and confidently. By removing the barriers to achievement, it's about reimagining education as a world where rigorous systems are there to provide a philosophy and framework that empowers every child. And putting the light on that every school can be a world-class school. And that every child is equipped with advanced cognitive skills and essential values, attitudes, and attributes that will lead them to lifelong success. And I do believe in my years of teaching, which is coming up to nearly 30 years, I do think all schools that I have worked in of different backgrounds all have this remit. And what I am finding amongst my readings and research about HPL is that this is about bringing a lot of those philosophies together. And to put it crudely, it's not rocket science. I do believe it's about channeling the students' energy amidst all the gamma that we see in schools and what students face outside schools. We do have a tough job, and I do believe that the HPL program does allow us to rethink the strategies that we've got in place and how maybe sometimes looking from a different perspective gives us an idea to look at ideologies and possibly remodel sections that may not quite fit all the students' profile that are in our schools. Deborah mentioned there are 30 generic success competencies students need to develop, and these are grouped into 8 sets across 5 different levels. And these levels start from the novice and range up to stage 5, where the student becomes an expert. And this logical and critical thinking grid is all about how they storm and norm their thinking and their outlook. And now they become very critical learners. And in our classrooms, we will see an array of students whose abilities are very, very broad. And we do see many high achieving students who possess a lot of these characteristics. And sometimes when we are thinking about our seating plans, we'll think about who we compare together in order for them to succeed on an equal level. And I do believe seating plans have a very good purpose in doing this, and periodically changing these to give students an opportunity to work with different types of learners as well as build social skills is really important. And it allows them to keep mixing things up and hopefully making progress. As we all know, if we think about a gym routine and we have maybe a set routine that we do on a daily basis, and we do that possibly for 3 to 4 weeks. But if we change it, and then we'll probably see some progress, have another 4 weeks and another routine. But yet if we keep that routine the same, we possibly find that we're not utilizing all of our muscles. So in the same way, the analogy here is that while some students might think, well, oh no, here we go again, we're being moved. But the logical thinking behind it is that we're providing them with opportunities to learn from others. And hopefully in the process, allowing them to reflect on what they have learned and how they are learning, particularly those learners who we all possibly have in our classrooms, get easily distracted, have low concentration levels, probably highly energized, and at times we have those that can be highly demanding and challenging. So for those students, as much as the high achieving students, it's important that we allow that variation and flexibility within our seating plans and take care in thinking when we are placing students in the classroom amongst their peers. So as Deborah said, over time, these competencies need to be mastered. They are taking place in every lesson, every experience, every exposure. And, in order for them to be recognized as high performance learners, these characteristics and attributes become a routine. And again, I'm sure you're visualizing your high performance learners and how they have developed and embedded quite established routines, and how we have maybe those at the other spectrum who maybe are struggling. So what we need to do is support these students who may have a little struggle here and there and help them to equally establish advanced cognitive practices and ensuring that they've got values, attributes and attitudes that are being expressed in every lesson. So the more frequently they do that and regularly they're doing it, they become standard practice as they are in place already for the high performing learner. So here we have the various characteristics that Deborah mentioned in her video. 20 for the ACPCs, and we've got the VAA characteristics there. Now some of you might be old enough to remember people before Deborah who we have been exposed to in our teaching and learning when it comes to looking at strategies of building learning power. So, learning power is that conceived composition of interwoven capacities. It's rather than the distinct monolithic mental entity. And, it's about the dispositions, as was mentioned by David Perkins, or you might have come across the habits of mind from Art Costa, and the most popular one, which are the building learning power and thinking skills from Guy Claxton. And, it's about promoting these skills. So some of us might be thinking, well, this is the same as what we've done before, but maybe it's rebranded under a new title and a new disguise. And I think, we couldn't possibly argue that, yes, it is that. And as with education, we find things are recycled. But it allows us to rethink, I think. Well, personally, that's what I think. Because going back to what I said earlier in terms of, getting stuck into a routine, and we seem to forget what, sometimes the purpose is. And it just takes somebody to come along and rebrand things. And having done, intensive research as Deborah has, I have found there's a lot of, sense in what she talks about within her theory, and, utilizing the holistic nature of schools in terms of building a student to be independent, to be resourceful, to be resilient and reflective. And, you might remember back of the heydays of the noughties when we were looking at maybe effective learning attributes. It's all about the metacognition and the learning that we process and how we learn, and getting us to be, deep thinkers. So we are not just thinking on the surface level, we're thinking outside the box, but we're also thinking deep inside the box as well, to consider all angles. And essentially this is what these characteristics are all about. So if we look at the next slide, that will just show us a little bit more of some of the wider attributes of a high performance learner in how they think. I just want to give you a moment to have a look and digest some of the characteristics here of how high performing learners think. Having just looked at those characteristics, we can see here many of them have been put into these five categories. And I think in the last 4 or 5 years, this big thing about metacognition and cognitive load and managing that, because as students they are exposed to so much pressure, so much information, and time restrictions in terms of what we have to get through in terms of curriculum. Not only is it a pressure on us as teachers to try and get through a lot of content to be ready for the exams, but sometimes it restricts us how we maybe plan for our lessons and what kind of teaching and learning strategies we might use. So we do often now think about how we can role reverse, and the Ofsted learning within the classroom being 80-20 ratio, it should be the students who's doing the hard work. So it is about how we plan for that big picture and how we get them to interact and make those links and be analytical and creative, as well as critical in how they approach things and think things through and see the end outcome of whatever it is that they might be looking at in terms of subjects. It could be science, it could be history, economics. There's a variety of things out there that these skills are being applied to, and that is the backbone of a high performance learning program, that every subject is instilling these characteristics and students over and over again are applying these, and as a result are becoming experts. And going back to the ladder that we spoke about earlier, becoming experts at utilizing these skills, so they are ready for that world out there once they've left the school and gone to university or going on apprenticeships or going into jobs. They are strong in their skill set and diverse in that skill set and able to manipulate themselves to be able to be versatile in whatever situation that they are exposed to, whether it be academic, whether it be a life situation. So here we have the values, attributes and attitudes characteristics in terms of how great learners behave. And I think we're now getting the picture that it's about collaboration, it's about holistically bringing things together, constant practice, your typical perseverance and resilience skills, being open-minded, taking risks. And again, these key attributes are not new. I'm sure, like me, you guys have been exposed to these over the years in terms of what we're trying to achieve in terms of skills for success in our students. And importantly, every day we are seeing these skills and attributes and values being displayed, usually in a positive manner. But yes, we know that certain influences out there do cloud young people's minds quite easily and often distort what should be a positive view into a negative view. So as a high performance learner, if you remember early on, I spoke about optimism, and it's all about looking at the brighter side of whatever the discussion might be on, and how, you know, maybe a mathematical equation might be causing a bit of a problem for an individual, and breaking that down and making it simplified and getting them to think how to do it, to get the answer, to find the outcome, rather than just showing them what the answer is or telling them what the answer is, should I say. It's about how do we get there. So metacognition and that load that often students feel is too much, it's about breaking that down, because that's where we end up with students becoming overwhelmed and that anxiety setting in. And part of our duty is to manage this and support that student and those students who do feel and experience those personal traumas. And you know, in a short while I'll talk about how we can support all our learners, and particularly those who do need a bit of hand-holding to achieve their full potential. So looking at how we develop our high-performing learners, we ultimately need to start with fulfilling their potential. And you know, many students will come with a lot of different learning attributes from the different school settings, whether it's come from primary school straight to secondary school, or they've come mid-year from another high school in the locality, or whether it's outside the location or region. So we need to think about, you know, what already do they have in their possession? What skill set have they got? And it's then working with that to strengthen that later in more detail and deepen those roots within them, so they're embedded and they become part of natural practice on a day-to-day basis. And it's about providing them with the opportunity to do that. And sometimes it is a starting point for many of changing their mindset. Now, some of you might be familiar with Carol Dweck's theory on growth mindset, the motivational theory about our beliefs regarding intelligence and the ability to change mindsets and the impact it has on how we approach challenges, respond to criticism, and the orientation of our goals. And you know, it's about looking at the glass. Is it half full or half empty? Now, this is all about stretching ourselves and sticking with it. And we often find those students who maybe don't possess all of those high performance learning characteristics are the ones who give up easily. So part of this program is about developing that innate thinking that I'm going to give up, and changing that into becoming more resilient and persevering in achieving what they are capable of achieving. Because ultimately, going back to the original onset of this CPD, it's about all students, all learners have the potential to achieve beyond what sometimes the data tells us. And I think it's important to consider, as Jaggi said in 2008, that you know, our brain is more plastic than we think. That you know, we can do something with it. We can increase our capacity. It's not about the genes we're born with. It's not, you know, you think about nature and nurture. So the environments that we are operating in are providing the tools for these students to increase their intelligence and their abilities and strengthen their talents, and, you know, exercise that muscle in the brain to expand it to be able to cope with the variety of different levels of knowledge that they need to store in there to help them get through their years of education, and ultimately, as they are measured in the terms of their academic ability, to perform well in exams. although it's not about being an exam factory, and that's the important thing we must remember. High performance learners are not just good at performing well in exams. It's about the whole individual. And going back to the slide, in terms of what good schools do, or the high performance learning schools, they look at the individual and they mold that individual to be a high performance learner in all aspects, inside the classroom as well as outside the classroom. So on the previous slide, you would have seen some of the characteristics of fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And, here we've got the fact that, it's important for students to understand that failure is about learning. We know that high performance learners are often quite self-critical, and they will put a lot of pressure on themselves because they want to consistently achieve highly. And so they're always looking at ways to be better at what they're doing and increase their performance and make progress. Whilst maybe at the other end, we might be challenged with having to comfort those who, through their mindsets, think, well, this is all I'm good at, this is all I can achieve. But yet, failure or fail, first attempt is learning, is about learning. It's about learning from those mistakes. It's about identifying where we need to maybe fill in the gaps and strengthen the areas that we are not so good at. And when it comes to things like writing reports or, essays, there's always gaps. And quite often we think, well, with the knowledge is there, what do we need to do with it? How do we put that structure in place? Scaffolding is often a thing that we might use to support students, and, giving them a framework to work with, to structure their writing. And, that has also worked in the past, and it continues to be a model or a tool and strategy that is used today. And when we think about it from a mathematical point of view or a scientific point of view, and there's experiments and equations and formulas that they need to learn, it's about breaking things down and giving steps and chunks for students to work with. And a report done in 2019 states that 70% of teachers who are using the high performance learning program, and the schools are accredited to the pathway, have had a positive effect on how much they enjoy their teaching, because of the way they're now maybe approaching that in the classroom, and how it's maybe changed their students' views on how they tackle the challenges and problems that they face on a day-to-day basis, particularly, as I said, those who may be on the vulnerable end are quick to give up. Essentially, it is about the experience that we offer and the opportunities that are available for our students, the pace we take them through, the breadth and depth. And it's not about cramming, A to Z of a topic into a lesson. It's about being selective. It's about ensuring that the deep learning is taking place. So, if it takes 1 or 2 lessons to go through 1 or 2 aspects of a particular topic area, well, that is what we should be doing. And, we talk about starting from the top level in terms of the student body of the group. And, it's about raising the people who may be not quite there to that level, as opposed to being the other way around. And that support network that we put in place is really, really important within the classroom, of maybe peers helping each other, because students do like that. And I think it's essential for all students to have the opportunity to work in peer settings, and like I said earlier, not always with the same mindset of individuals, that we are mixing and matching up the groups to allow them to get a variety of input from different individuals. So it's important that we allow students to practice this is, building their motivational levels to become successful. It is known to develop a habit. It needs to be done consistently for about 21 days for it to get embedded. Here, practice of, they say almost 10,000 hours allows a student to become a master in that particular area, and the brain needs that long to become assimilated with all that it needs to know for true mastery. So essentially, it's important that we provide those opportunities, we motivate our students. As I said earlier, failure is not a problem. Failure is all about learning, and until they get it right, we've got to keep motivating them and possibly using different strategies to keep the motivation going and the momentum going for them. And going back to what I said, it's increased that mindset, that resilience and perseverance. The glass isn't half empty, it's half full. You're nearly there. And, it's about keep on going until we do get it right and we become an expert, and then we can move on to the next step. A criticism of this could be that, we do have restrictions or limited time to help and support, because there's always more that what we can do. There has to be, I suppose, a cut-off point of when we say, right, go alone now, have a go, because I think sometimes scaffolding can become spoon feeding, and we maybe become a little bit afraid ourselves as teachers, because ultimately we are also measured by outcomes to some extent in terms of performance management, and we may be under the illusion that it's better for us to do it for them, but that's not going to help the students. So we really need to provide them with that challenge and support to get to where they need to be as high performing learners. Part of that is giving them that autonomy, and Daniel Pink talks about his strategy in motivation, that students need to be enabled to become intrinsically motivated, and using those what he calls internal drivers to get them to consider how they can become masters in the field that they are working in. And ultimately, it's about stimulating them to do their best. And what we've got to consider is, in the workplace or the school environment for the students, people will always try to do their best. And what we should be doing is helping them to achieve their best. It's an integral part of our teaching profession that we will find tools to help them to ultimately achieve the grade that they are capable of. And that's about giving them choices, challenges, allowing them to collaborate where they need, and some element of control. So that autonomy that we are encouraging is essential, that we don't hold their hand. We do it for as much as is needed and for as long as is needed, through maybe mechanism of scaffolding, and then slowly taking those scaffolding elements away so they can do it alone. Now, there has been a bit of a pattern with the CPD where I've made references to some of the renowned researchers in pedagogy, in the teaching and learning in particular. And another heritage of that is John Hattie. And in his research in '92, he spoke about feedback and the power of feedback. And I think over the years, marking and feedback has been a bit of a bane of our teaching profession. And I think, every year we speak about reducing workload, and marking and feedback is a massive part of that. But essentially, I think to support those higher learning performers, we need to give them feedback. They relish that feedback because it allows them to identify what has gone well and what they need to be doing to be improving. And unless they are getting consistently high marks or full marks, there's always progress to be made. Things can always be better. They can always be doing improvements. So I think part of that feedback is essential. And Jan Hottie talks about the feedback model and how it helps to deliver constructive focus for those students who are struggling. And the context, the contents, the consequences and the changes are really important in terms of being timely fed back, because it allows them to address their weaknesses in order to develop that growth mindset of what they need to be doing better for next time. So, it's important that it's not about micromanaging or micro teaching, as we say. It's about allowing the student to review their learning and reflect. And the power of the teacher feeding back for a student is immense, because it allows them to get that professional input of what they should be doing to be improving. So it's about praising them for what they've done, maybe identifying problem areas, and then looking at the potential to transform that work that they're doing, and giving them a constructive criticism and having a conversation that will motivate them and empower them. And essentially the feedback needs to be strong and sensitive in its nature, because ultimately what we want to do is get a real result at the request of maybe saying, okay, this is what you need to work on, and whatever subject it might be, and using subject specific language to help them understand that, and referring back to, as we always do, to the assessment criteria, and remembering that we need to separate our own emotions from the task and deliver feedback in the way that allows the student to fulfill their potential, because I think that unbiased conscious is often there when we are marking, and I think we've got to avoid being subjective when we are marking as examiners for other schools in the summer term. We don't know that student, and sometimes that's quite easy. And a practice that used to happen at one of the schools I used to work in, and we used to mix and match the papers up, so we didn't always mark our own set, because then it allowed us to not be biased in when we're marking and thinking, well, I know this student, I know what they're trying to say, but at the end of the day, we're not always going to do them any favours if that's what we are going to do. So it's about our emotional intelligence and how we respond to the feedback that we're giving, how we respond to the work that we're receiving in when we're giving that feedback. So as we think about all our learners, many schools are doing many wonderful things in how we challenge the most able students. But we need to make sure we're applying those same tools to all our learners to systematically get them to become equally competent and not differentiate, because you will find, as I mentioned earlier, in high performance learning schools there's very little differentiation. Another buzzword of the late 90s and early noughties, what we're doing for differentiation for input, or is it through output, is it by task? And the amount of work that would go into that from a teacher point of view was tremendous. But we've got to try and think about all our students being on the same level, and then maybe making some adaptations as we go through. So we're starting with the top and we're just tunneling it to the level that everybody's able to manage, and then pockets of intervention during the course of the lesson should suffice for those individuals. And I know timing is really limited and really restrictive within our daily teaching, and then sometimes we know it impacts on our lunch and break times, that we need to maybe then speak to students individually, but it's allowing for that time during the time that students are in school, or having an alternative channel that we use. And in today's world, we've got Teams, we've got Google Classrooms, and other platforms that schools are using. So that could be another channel that we use to support these students, so they've got somewhere that they can reach out to should they need further support when they are not in the classroom, and maybe we are not available so easily. So as we summarise, the picture is clear. It's about high performance is an attainable target for everyone. It's about everybody's role in the school contributing to helping the students to build those attributes, having conditions in place that make it easy for them to have the opportunity to grow their mindset. And we're mindful of our words, we're mindful of our actions, and in our planning of our activities, that we can take into consideration the different levels of ability, but at the same time we are raising the bar for the students to be able to reach those levels that maybe before were not possible. Every subject will have its own formula of what works for that best, and these competencies can be interwoven into what is already in place. Encouraging students to become high performance learners should not be a chore, and it should not be a challenge. It's just possibly a way of rethinking and remodeling of what is already happening in terms of good practice. You might have come across the Rita Pearson quote that every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Now, I think it's important that the underlying message from the High Performance Learning Programme is just that every child has the ability, and we should be their champion who is supporting them along the way to achieve the best that they can. Here's a book for parents that could be suggested on your book list, or even one for yourselves if you have children. That it's not in the genes, as we said earlier. There's a lot of things that we can nurture and develop with the right tools in place, and also with our own mindset and thinking to guide them to achieving the best outcomes for them. The last few slides are references to today's CPD, which I hope you've enjoyed. They are QR codes for you to quickly access the resources. If you have any questions, here's my email, contact, and I'm happy to oblige wherever I can. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for attending this CPD session.